Good afternoon, and thank you for joining today's webinar. My name is Matthew Jane, and I'm the Learning and Engagement Manager for the State Historical Society of Iowa. The Iowa History 101 webinars, presented on the second and fourth Thursdays of each month, explore Iowa's history from pre-statehood to current day. You can learn more about this series and all of our programs on our website at history.iowa.gov. Please remember to sign up for each webinar you'd like to attend, and don't worry if you can't watch live, all presentations will be recorded. Today we'll hear from Jessi Galligan. Today's program focuses on the colorful history of Pella, Iowa's Tulip Time. A few housekeeping points before we begin to introduce our speaker. Everyone came into this webinar on mute with cameras off. Closed captions are available by clicking the closed caption button on your screen. The webinar is being recorded and will be placed on the Iowa Culture page of YouTube in just a few days. I've disabled the chat function, but if you have any questions, please type them into the Q&A feature throughout the webinar. My colleague, Jess Runlet, is watching that feature and will prepare a list of questions for the presenter at the end of the presentation. But please note we may not have time to get to all the questions for the presenter. And now I'm pleased to introduce our presenter for today. Jessi Galligan is the Executive Director of Pella Historical Museums and Tulip Time, where she has worked in various roles since 2016. A Pella native, Jessi graduated from Calvin University in Grand Rapids, Michigan, but couldn't stay away from her community and soon moved back home. She's been involved in Tulip Time since she was 2 months old, from participating in the baby parade, to playing in the marching band while wearing wooden shoes, to dancing with the duchesses, to representing Pella on the Tulip Court. Today, her favorite part of the Tulip Festival are greeting visitors, answering questions about her handmade Dutch costume, and eating plate after plate of poffertjes. And now I'm happy to turn over to Jessi to begin the webinar.
Thank you so very much. I appreciate that introduction, and I am so happy to be here. It's been a wonderful life in Pella, getting to go to Tulip Time every single year, and I look forward to it. We're getting really, really close now. We're just 3 weeks away now from Tulip Time, which is pretty amazing. So I'm excited to be able to tell you some history of Tulip Time, beginning back in 1935. So we'll go ahead and start. Back in 1935, the picture you see here is of Anne Teisling. She was a music teacher here in Pella, and she put together an operetta called Tulip Time in Pella that her students performed. And it was such a success that just 2 weeks later, our first Tulip Time happened. So after viewing this operetta, local businessman Lon Wormhout and president of Central College Erwin Lubbers, they prompted the Chamber of Commerce. They said, we need to hold an annual Tulip Time festival or a Tulip Day to commemorate our Dutch heritage. And this was a popular thing throughout the country in the 1930s. We saw different festivals coming to fruition, especially heritage festivals like this one. And in the 1930s, this was when a lot of the grandchildren of the original Dutch settlers to Pella in the 1840s were probably looking back and thinking, you know, this is something that we really need to hold on to and grasp is our parents' and grandparents' heritage. So 6 committees were formed to pull off this one-day festival. 6 committees in 2 weeks pulled off a one-day festival. And this festival included the town crier and the burgomaster. The burgomaster is like the mayor of Pella during Tulip Time only. They had a maypole drill, there were Dutch psalms and speeches, and of course they reenacted the operetta that started this whole thing off. So it was a smashing success in 1935 when this very first Tulip Time happened. The first Tulip Time didn't have any tulips. Of course, you probably know that tulips have to be planted in the fall, and then they rest all winter long, and they bloom in April and May. So they hadn't, of course, planted tulips beforehand. So no tulips for the first festival, but a local woodworker who was actually from the Netherlands made 125 4-foot-tall wooden tulips that were put around flagpoles actually in Central Park to nod to this Dutch heritage and tulips. But of course, no real ones. And maybe you've heard that this year we were a little concerned about the status of the tulips. They were coming a little bit early with the warm weather that we've been having. And so we wanted to nod back to this heritage and created a wooden tulips up for ourselves. I think we've given away like 550 wooden tulips now. That these were made by 2 local woodworkers by hand again. And we've been so excited to see them come back in beautifully decorated for us to distribute around tulip beds that might need a little extra color come Tulip Time. So this was sort of a nod back to this piece of heritage from 1935. Also, at the first Tulip Time, merchants and shops downtown showcased Dutch antiques in their windows, and a lot of people pulled together makeshift Dutch costumes to wear. You can see this young man has probably not a terribly authentic Dutch costume on, but they pulled it together. They wanted to look like it was Holland in the old times. He does have wooden shoes though, so he did accomplish that part of his costume. And like I said, it was so successful that planning for the next year began right away. So this is Tulip Time of 1936 that we see in this picture. And this Tulip Time was the first one that really became what we know today. It of course was planned a year in advance. In the fall, 85,000 tulips were planted in order to bloom in the spring. And Tulip Time was initially funded by donations from local merchants. They were doing volunteer groups were doing door-to-door solicitation, going around asking for donations from the different merchants and shops to be able to fund this festival. And the festival this time was 5 days long. So we went from 1 day in 1935 to 5 days in 1936. And each of those 5 days had a different theme that represented a value that they wanted to share with the world. So one of those was History Day, one was Church Day, Neighbor Day, Central College Day, and Pella Day. So they were able to accomplish all of Pella's values wrapped up into just these 5 days. We can talk about some firsts that happened in Tulip Time in 1936. So first of all, we had our very first Tulip Queen. So in the middle there is Lenora Goss. She was the great granddaughter of Pella's founder, Henry Schulte. And she was elected by a popular vote from the entire community putting in votes. And what they asked for was someone who was between 16 and 21 years old, of good reputation and thoroughly typical of the Holland influence. So Lenora, being the great-granddaughter of Henry Schulte and being involved in the community, was chosen as our first Tulip Queen. Also in 1936 was the first time that we saw street scrubbing here in Pella. This is a tradition that continues today, of course. The street is scrubbed before the afternoon parade, and the Burgermeister and the City Council go and inspect it to make sure it's clean enough for the parade to begin. And the parade also began in 1936. At this point, it consisted mostly of tractors and local bands. We didn't see the big flashy floats that we would see later back in 1936. Then we move on to 1937. So this photo depicts the sunken gardens that we know now, which still exists. Then it was called Tulip Town Park, and this was developed to be an addition to Tulip Time. Like I said, the pond is still there. It is shaped like a wooden shoe. It was then, and it still is today. And also in 1937 was the addition of a flower show. And again, that flower show continues today. In 1937, 27 committees were working on Tulip Time, which was still a 5-day festival at this point. So it's crazy to think of 27 separate committees making this festival happen, but it would become even more involved, obviously, in the next years. 1938 saw the addition of the baby parade, which I mentioned I had been in when I was a baby as well, and school children marching. And we still have those in parades, as well as the miniature Dutch village. So that's the picture on the left here. You can see a woman presenting the miniature Dutch village. It was presented at the high school, which is now the community center. And now that miniature village has grown probably quadruple, if not more, the size of what it was then. And it has a permanent home in our interpretive center and Vermeer Windmill complex. So that tradition continues as well, but it can be seen year-round instead of just at Tulip Time. Also in 1938 was the first trip to the Capitol and to visit the governor and the legislature. I could not find a photo of that from the 1930s, but again, this is a tradition that continues today. So this is our Tulip Court from a couple of years ago. And we are one of only 2 groups that gets to go actually on the floor and speak to the representatives on the floor. So that's a very special honor. I think it's because we bring them Dutch letters, so that they say, sure, you can come on down. Also in 1938, at this point, 225,000 tulips were planted and blooming in Pella during tulip time, which to go from 0 tulips in 35, 3 years prior, to 225 in 38 is pretty incredible. In 1940, we saw our first tulip toren, or tulip tower, in Pella. This first one was made of wood, and it was a stage for community functions, especially shows during tulip time, those shows and speeches that we talked about. It was built to last just 1 year, but being the thrifty Dutch that we are, we kept it around for 3 years before it fully deteriorated and was really no longer usable at that point. So this is a video, it does not have sound, so don't worry about trying to listen for that. But this is showing a parade in 1963. And we're so lucky to have this footage captured by a local resident here of people enjoying tulip time in 1963. This was when the vision for tulip time really began to grow beyond just the festival and became a permanent fixture in Pella with the addition of museums. And you can kind of see in this video, Dutch fronts were added to businesses downtown, while other businesses were trying to, or other communities, excuse me, were taking down for urban renewal. Pella said, no, we're going to preserve these old buildings and we're going to put up Dutch fronts. And it was also in the 1960s, we had our first evening lighted parades, as you saw in that clip right there. So, marching bands, of course. And I want you to pay attention to this float right here because it's going to come back. So take a close look at this float that we're seeing here in 1963. Also in the 1960s, Pella Historical Society reorganized as a 501c3 nonprofit. And that's when we decided to go from a little festival that happens with a one-room museum, and there was a vision for an entire historical village. So the first part of this equation was the boyhood home of Wyatt Earp. This was purchased in 1966. And the people began building up the village around it. There was a grist mill built, a log cabin was brought in, actually a real historic log cabin. A general store was created in a building that had already been there from 1853. And the Sterenberg Library became a vision for a historic library. It actually had been a blacksmith shop back in early Pella. And it's interesting too, so this is the boyhood home of Wyatt Earp that you see here. It's still a museum on our campus, our historical village. But back in the 1960s, there was sort of this idea that Wyatt Earp, was he a good guy? Was he a bad guy? I don't know. So you can see on the sign there, it just says Pella Historical Museum. They were not advertising that Wyatt Earp lived there because he perhaps didn't have the same values as what the people of the Historical Society wanted to represent. Moving on to the 1970s. So at this point, donations were given to add a complex to the east side of the historical village. And this included a pioneer farmhouse. We call it the Klein Crumb Farmhouse. And this was built to demonstrate what early settlers to Pella who lived in rural areas of Pella would have lived in, as well as a replica of a townhouse. That is the Viersen House, and it is an exact replica of a home that was built by one of Pella's first doctors in Pella. And the house no longer exists, but this replica is a part of our historical village with the parlor and the kitchen to demonstrate more urban life in early Pella. And of course, the Schulte Church was a part of this complex as well. So you can see on the left side of your screen, that is the original Schulte Church. When the founder of Pella, Domini Schulte, Domini meaning reverend, came to Pella, he built his own church to preach at. And unfortunately, that church no longer stands. It was torn down. But in, like I said, the 1970s, there was a vision to recreate this church. It's not quite 100% scale. I think it's maybe 3/4 scale. But it's a wonderful homage to Domini Schulte's first church here in Pella, and a great place now for things like weddings and gatherings as well. It's a a great thing for us. Also in the 70s, Domini Scolti's descendants donated his home to us. So pictured here is the Scolti house. It was built in 1848 is when it was completed. Of course, it was about half the size then, and much has been added on to and changed over the years. But we are so lucky that the descendants of Scolti decided to donate this home to us. And one of those people was Lenora Goss, who was our first tulip queen. She lived in this house until the 1980s when she passed away. But before she passed away in the 70s, her and her brother Pete had the foresight to donate the house to Pella Historical so that it would be preserved for years and generations to come. So this house remains one of our focal museums that people can come to and tour. It's decorated back in the Victorian 1850s-ish style. And it's just wonderful that we still have this home that was really one of the first big homes in Pella. Moving on to the 1980s. So first of all, I don't have it pictured here, but Heritage Hall was added to the museums. And this is connected to that East Side addition, like I was mentioning. It includes collections of Gouda pottery, which is a Dutch folk art style pottery, and then rotating exhibit space. So currently our exhibit this year is Tulip Queen costumes of the last decade, which was a really fun one to put together. Every year that we make a costume for the Tulip Queen in her court, we also make an exact replica of the Queen's costume that we can keep in our archives. So that's a really fun exhibit to have on display this year. Also in Heritage Hall, we have Goliath, our giant street organ. We needed a safe place for him since he's so massive with big doors and windows that open up so he can come outside and play for us. So it's a 2-story building and another wonderful addition to our museums. This photo here shows the Glockenspiel that was built in the 1980s. So this is a traditional European glockenspiel. It's one of the only ones in North America of its kind. And again, people in the community wanted to bring this to Pella. There had been a building in this space that had burned down, and rather than letting it go to waste, the space, or building another building, they decided to make this beautiful piece of architecture. So still in Pella today, you can stop by and listen to it, play Dutch tunes. It chimes on the hour, on the quarter hour. Sometimes I can hear it from my house, so that's lovely too. And 8 figurines are inside. So on one side, 4 figures come out, including Domini Scolti, Maria Scolti, his wife, Wyatt Earp, and we also have a blacksmith that comes out and Dutch dancers. So you sit and you watch it and you really get the whole history of Pella in a 10-minute little show at the Glockenspiel. I wanted to go over some highlights, just some interesting things that happened throughout the history, the 89-year history of Tulip Time. First of all, during World War II, Pella did have Tulip Time still during World War II. There was, of course, much concern for relatives in the Netherlands and thankfulness for American freedoms. And of course, there was an influx of immigration as well from the Netherlands to America at this point. It wasn't until 1945 that Pella changed something about their Tulip Time Festival as a result of World War II. So the 45 festival was actually held at the airbase in Ottumwa, and 2,500 Navy personnel were stationed there. So rather than holding Tulip Time in Pella, a huge group of Pella residents went to the airbase and gave their play and their Dutch dancing and their music in order to just raise morale at the airbase. In 1946, Tulip Time was actually canceled in 46. And this was as the people of the Netherlands were recovering from German occupation. People in Pella thought, we don't know if it's right to be celebrating at this point when we have friends, family, people we know in the Netherlands still, who are suffering as a result of what happened during World War II. So rather than have a festival where the community benefited, they raised money to send over to the Netherlands for war relief. So this shows 1947, and this was Pella's centennial year. So it was a big deal as Pella had been in existence for 100 years at this point. There was a pageant that they threw called City of Refuge, and over 600 people were in this pageant type play. Also, as you can see in this picture, the Netherlands sent over 1,000 wooden shoes as a thank you for the relief aid that we had sent the year prior. So they sent over 1,000 wooden shoes pictured here, as well as tulip bulbs. And the tulip bulbs were placed into a garden by Fairhaven, back then, you know, the old folks home retirement community. And that garden continues today with information about how it was started with this tulip bulbs from the Netherlands. Jumping ahead to 1968, this is when our current tulip toren was built, and it mirrors the elements of that original one with the two poles and the crest on top. And it was built in a slightly different location. It was moved a little further west and facing Franklin Street. And it's a wonderful centerpiece for our city park there on the square. And it remains sort of the hub of Tulip Time. It's where grandstand shows happen and Dutch dancing happens in front of it. And of course, it's used throughout the year too for city band concerts and other performances. In 1997, Princess Margriet of the Netherlands visited our Tulip Time Festival. You can see her there walking out of the Pella Opera House. Behind her, the man in glasses with the medallion, he's portraying the Burgomaster at that point. So you can imagine it would have been interesting for her to visit this Dutch community here in America, despite being a princess in the Netherlands. 2002 saw the windmill coming to town. So the Vermeer Windmill and Interpretive Center were built in 2001 and 2002, and it had been a long time dream of Pella residents to bring a corn mill or grain mill to Pella, representing the agricultural heritage of many of the people who founded this community in the 1840s. So this is not a mill that actually came from the Netherlands. It was built in the Netherlands, though. It's just not a historic one. So it was built brand new for us and then taken apart and shipped over piece by piece back to Pella and raised and put up, and it was quite the community spectacle. So the windmill has been a part of Pella now for 22 years, and it's hard to imagine that corner without the Vermeer windmill. And of course, it's sort of the cornerstone of our museums now over at Pella Historical. My favorite highlight that I don't think a lot of people know about Pella's Tulip Time is that in 2010, we broke the Guinness Book of World Records for the most number of people dancing in wooden shoes. So you can see that poor little guy down at the bottom, he's losing his sponges in his shoes. But we had, I should have written down the exact number, but I think it was 2,000 some people Dutch dancing in wooden shoes. They did the same song, slowed down over and over. And I think the previous record had been 600 or something like that. So we really smashed it. It was a super fun time. I remember being a part of it. It was a cold, nasty day, but we have that certificate hanging in the museums now that says that we hold that record. So today, how do we continue this festival that is such an important piece of Pella? It's still the first full weekend in May, and I shouldn't say still, it actually has migrated. It used to be the next weekend, but now due to warmer temperatures and things like that, we've bumped it up a week. So this year it's May 2, 3, and 4, the first Thursday, Friday, Saturday of May. And it's still sponsored and organized by Pella Historical Museums. Obviously, that first one in 1935 was sort of an all-hands-on-deck effort, but starting in 36 and every year since then, Pella Historical has been the primary sponsor and organizer of this event. It takes the cooperation and help of hundreds of businesses and organizations and probably thousands of volunteers. When our town of 10,000 people hosts 150, 200,000 people in 3 days, not a lot of people get a lot of rest. It's an all hands on deck situation. Planning for the following year still begins immediately after Tulip Time is finished. We do take about a month off, but in June, the steering committee is up and at 'em again to get the next year planned. And speaking of the steering committee, our Tulip Time Steering Committee is a committee of volunteers. It's 8 people who serve for 4 years each. The first year they're learning about what their task is. The second year they're just simply doing that. The third year they serve as a co-chair, so they're leading the group. And then the fourth year they're serving in an advising role, training the person who will be coming in to replace them. So that is divided up into a head of marketing, a person who's in charge of food, floats, and fan stands, visitor support person, parades and performances. We have someone in charge of the tulip court, Dutch dancers, and pop-ups, and someone is in charge of barricades, the Dutch market, and the special events permit. And yes, the special events permit that we submit to the city council is truly about a year-long task in and of itself. It's amazing how many little parts and pieces have to go into that to get approval. And then each of these committees has dozens, if not hundreds, of people that they organize. So from tractor drivers and the tractors who pull the tour wagons, to the women who make the Dutch costumes and the tulip court costumes, to the organizing the people who announce the script during the parade. So it's really this spider web. We have our board and director, and then the steering committee, and then under the steering committee is all these different tiers of people who can make it happen. Of course, we have a very close partnership with the city to ensure visitor safety and transportation and things like that. And our office at Pella Historical gives support in a lot of ways as well. So we're handling social media and website updates, and we answer literally thousands of questions about the festival that come in on Facebook and phone calls and emails. I think starting in maybe February, we were getting upwards of 50 calls a week. Now it's closer to 100 calls a week. How are the tulips doing? When are the tulips going to be in bloom? We even had someone call us back in March and say, when can I come dig up the tulip bulbs? We were like, why don't you just let them bloom first, and then we can get to the point where you can dig them up. And of course, we could not pull off this festival without the help of so many businesses and individuals who donate their time and resources, their talents, their money, and so many other things. Every food booth you see downtown is run by a business or an organization doing this for a fundraiser. So church groups and school groups. The Dutch market is handled by the Pella Business Women's Club, and they're in charge of that. We have committees who put together the church service that happens the day after Tulip Time is over. So I couldn't even begin to list out everybody if I tried. We do kind of try. We put a big thank you ad in the Town Crier newspaper after Tulip Time is over, and every year we have to include a caveat. I'm so sorry if we forgot anybody, because it's truly a community celebration for everyone to participate in. Like I said, this does bring 150 to 200,000 people to Pella over the 3-day period. A lot of that is dependent on weather, of course, but this is more than 15 times the population of Pella. So the whole community really shuts down and celebrates all of it. And it does bring in a $3 million-ish boost to Pella and the surrounding area. We had a study done, I think, in 2017, so I'm guessing the number has increased since then, but at that point, they estimated a $3.2 million boost to Pella and the surrounding 30 miles that Tulip Time brings in. So it's an incredible economic boon to this area as well. In addition, 300,000 tulips are planted now, so we haven't jumped up much since that 1938 festival with 200 some. We're looking at plans and things coming up on the horizon of how we can get more tulips planted in Pella for Tulip Time. But we at Pella Historical plant around 100,000. The city of Pella plants around 100,000. And then various businesses and individuals, we estimate, plant around another 100,000 to get us to 300,000 tulips blooming. Most of them are free to see as well in Pella. Really only the historical village beds are behind a ticket, and that's because it's part of our museums. But every other tulip in Pella is something that the public is free to enjoy any time of day. So what can you see in Pella besides tulips? This is what we have really focused our marketing efforts on this year, with some questions about when the tulips would be best. So one of the things that you can see are Dutch dancers, whether it's the duchesses, the Dutch family singers. We have our tiny tulips who are little elementary school kids who go around and dance in their wooden shoes and sing. You can see the Tulip Queen and her royal court. We've had a Tulip Queen every year since 1936. This year, Mia Andringa and her royal court are representing Pella well. And we get questions about how they represent Pella. You know, we see them the 3 days of Tulip Time up on the stage and in the parades and everything. But they are working hard really since December, where they go around to different organizations in town to present a program about Pella and Tulip Time. And ask for volunteers too. That's something that we really need. They get to go to the state capitol, like I mentioned, and they're on various news channels and commercials promoting the event for us. During Tulip Time, we also have 2 parades, all 3 days of Tulip Time, the daytime parade and the evening parade. So on the top right there, you can see the famous Pella Dutch marching band as they perform. They went to the Rose Bowl a few years ago, so that was a pretty big deal. In the bottom left, you see what we call the Twirly Ladies float. And if you remember from the video where I told you to keep an eye on this is our modern version of the Twirly Ladies float. So it's a great way to show off the many different provinces and villages of the Netherlands and the different dress that they would have worn throughout history. Our museums are hugely popular during Tulip Time, and we love welcoming thousands of visitors to our museums, whether that's the Schulte House, like I mentioned, or the Vermeer Windmill. And special during Tulip Time, we get artisans in to demonstrate their various crafts. So the blacksmith shop, someone doing hand quilting, rug braiding, rope making, and of course the klompen making is very popular. So we have people come in who donate their time. They just love doing this, and hand carve wooden shoes that people can purchase and take home with them. I don't know if they'd be terribly comfortable. They're a little rough around the edges, but they're great to plant a cactus or something in. Of course, like I mentioned, there are so many new foods to try, whether it's poffertjes or stroopwafels. These ladies here are making Dutch letters, which is very famous from Pella. They're actually members of the Jarsma family who come into our village bakery during Tulip Time and hand make Dutch letters to bake in our ovens and sell hot and fresh out of the oven, which is by far the best way to enjoy a Dutch letter. If you haven't experienced that, that's sort of the secret. I don't think a lot of people know that we sell Dutch letters in the bakery at the museums, but you got to get there if you're in Pella for Tulip Time. Our grandstand show is another pillar of our festival. So in the afternoon, we have a grandstand show that introduces the Tulip Queen and her court. There's Dutch dancing and singing, a Dutch culture style show to show off the many different costumes of the different provinces and villages, Dutch national anthem, and all sorts of other things. And this all takes place right before the parade, so that folks who paid for a ticket can remain in the grandstands to enjoy the parade as well. And then in the evening, it's our Feesthouden show. Each of the 3 nights, we have a different music group of some kind come and perform, and this event is completely free and open to the public thanks to a generous sponsor in the community. And so it's a wonderful way to bring the community and visitors alike together in this space to enjoy good music and Dutch culture. And the other thing that we have, and I don't have a photo of it, is the Dutch market. So this draws a lot of people as well. Over in West Market Park, we have 200 vendor tents set up where people can go and shop and enjoy this open air market, similar to ones that might be in the Netherlands, just a short walk away from the downtown area. So these are just a few highlights of Pella's Tulip Time. I'm sure I'm missing some things. You have to come down and see it for yourself. This year, we're excited to have a series of speakers come talk about tulip farming and what it's like to grow tulips and the history of tulips, why they're so important to the Dutch. We will have a brand new mural this year. Welcome to Tulip Time mural. So many things to see when you come visit Pella. This year, Tulip Time is May 2, 3, and 4, as I mentioned. And we really hope that you'll come join us to come see the tulips, to come see the dancing and the culture, grab a delicious bite to eat. And we look forward to you joining us. I would love to answer any questions that folks have.
Well, thank you,
Thank you,
Jessi.
Jessi. Absolutely.
That was a
That was
really
a really
tremendous. Oh, I'm not sure why we're getting this echo. That was a really tremendous overview of Tulip Time, and I know as a longtime fan of Pella and Tulip Time, I enjoyed it and certainly learned a lot. Have a list of questions, but I would encourage all of our attendees to submit questions through the Q&A feature because we have about 25 minutes left and we will have a robust conversation and we can definitely get a lot of questions in. Jessi, I just want to start out with what I think is a really fun question about Tulip Time, and I think anybody who's ever been to Tulip Time could think about this one, but what's your favorite tulip? What's the must see, have to see, doesn't matter when it blooms?
Oh man, that's a great question. Well, there are over 200 varieties of tulips planted in Pella. I think that's on the low end. I think it's quite a bit more than that. And I mean, it really is just based on like what your favorite color is. That's what it really takes to see your favorite tulip. But there's so many varieties. We have fringed varieties, parrot tulips, double bloom tulips. This year and last year, the city of Pella received a shipment of what were called nightmare tulips. They're the darkest, most black tulips that exist. Last year, I think the city of Pella received 100 of them. This year, I think they received 300 some. Only 1,000 of them were sent to America at all, and Pella received the largest amount of them from that number. Those are by the Information Windmill on the square. So would definitely recommend looking for the Nightmare tulip. My favorites are just the tall ones. I really like the ones that are like very tall. This year we have a lot of short tulips because of the short growing season, but they're all beautiful. You can't go wrong.
They are all beautiful, and it's always fun to see all the different varieties. Those nightmare tulips are incredible. I remember seeing them last year, and they're just an absolute showstopper. And now we've talked tulips. So our next question is about food. And there are some attendees wondering, are Dutch letters available at the museum only during tulip time or other times also? Can you talk about how we can eat this delicious Dutch treat?
Yes, they are only available at our museum during the 3 days of tulip time, and they often sell out by about noon, 1 o'clock. So would definitely recommend getting to the museum earlier than later if you want a fresh out of the oven Dutch letter. Of course, Jarsma Bakery and Vanderploeg Bakery are making them fresh every night too, so you can go get your Dutch letter fix from either of those bakeries. And I know several of the grocery stores actually purchase them from Jarsma and Vanderploeg to stock as well. So if you can't make it all the way into town, which I hope you do, but if you can't, there are some grocery stores on the edge of town that would love for you to stop in and grab some Dutch letters there as well.
Definitely. And if you can't make it to Pella at all, I've also heard you can get them shipped.
I believe
So,
Jarsma does ship, so
yeah,
yes, that would be another great option.
absolutely. Now, are there any past tulip time activities or traditions that you would like to bring back?
That's a good question. I think that part of what began the festival that we don't have much of anymore are, speeches or opportunities for people to present about Dutch culture, Dutch history. Obviously, you're seeing it in action everywhere. But I think back to those first tulip times that had speakers come and just talk about Pella's connection to Dutch heritage, and I think that would be something that would be wonderful to see. Like I mentioned with our partnership with Barn Swallow Flowers, that's who it will be hosting these tulip farmers to come speak about why tulips are important to Dutch culture and how to cultivate them and care for them. I think that's a good first step in bringing some of that back to talk a little bit more about the educational side of things, beyond just the colors and dance and joy that Tulip Time brings, is to hear some more facts and history and care tips for tulips. So we're
Mhm.
really excited to have them this year.
That sounds like it'll be a really tremendous addition. And now our next question is another one from the audience. And you talked a little bit about the clothing for the queen and the court, but could you talk more about who sews that and just the outfits in general. I know as an Iowan child who was not Dutch and therefore felt like not much in Pella, I always was fascinated with the clothes. So could you talk more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So the costumes are a huge part of Tulip Time in Pella and a source of pride for people as well, I think. There's 12 provinces in the Netherlands and hundreds of villages within these provinces that all have different dress stemming back from, we might know from the 1400s on. A lot of the costumes that you see will be from early 1800s to mid 1900s when you're in Pella. And these costumes are things that some people will get, oh, I have to march with my friends as a student, so I'm just going to go find one. Or maybe someone made it for them because it's a particularly beautiful one that they want. Or maybe it represents their own culture and heritage of where their great grandparents came from when they immigrated to America from the Netherlands. There are a lot of people in town who can sew and have a lot of knowledge on Dutch heritage sewing. So we keep a list at our museum. So when people call, we know where to send them. In particular, there is a business in town called Custom Costumes. They're actually housed right in our historical village. They take up a building, and they are the ones who make our costumes for our duchesses. That's a group of 16 high school girls who dance, and our Tulip Queen and Court. And every year they do a lot of research to come up with what costume they're going to select for the Tulip Queen and Court. They're always completely unique, completely handmade, and takes tons of hours of research and careful stitching and measuring and putting everything together. I'm not a sewer, so it's all above my head, but it's a culture. We just last week had our Dutch costume market. So anyone can come in and bring in a costume that they want to sell, and we retain a percentage, but they take home most of the money then from when we open the doors up, and anyone can come in and buy. So when we first opened up on Thursday, the line was out the door and halfway down the block for the Dutch costume market. And costumes are shared amongst family members as well. I think I was the oldest grandchild, but I think my costume that I wore when I was 10 is probably now worn by my 10-year-old cousin as well. So they're really passed through the generations. They're made to be expandable and shrinkable as you grow and change. I myself have one costume that I purchased at the market, like I was saying. I have my costume from when I was a duchess, but I was the boy, so it's a boy costume. And from when I was on the tulip court, of course, that does not fit me anymore. And then my very favorite costume is the one that my grandma handmade me based on a pattern that we received from the ladies at Custom Costumes. One of the shops downtown keeps fabric and notions and things like that to make these costumes. And it's really just something that the community comes together to do for each other and for family and friends. And it's one of my favorite parts of the festival. I mean, you come down to Pella and half the town is in Dutch costumes. Even if they're not in a parade or they're not a volunteer, they're going to put on their Dutch costume just to walk around and make the town more colorful and vibrant.
Well, thank you for all that information. And what I'm hearing is anyone can buy the Dutch costume. So I need to get to that market instead of buying the pattern at Quilted Windmill and trying to make my own costume. So thank you for that. I hope many of the attendees are able to arrive in Pella in Dutch dress.
Hey, if you're not from Pella and you still want to show up in a costume, that sounds great. We'll take you. And then we'll put you to work volunteering at the museum.
Perfection. Perfection. Our next question, Jessi, could you talk a little bit about what do the schools in Pella, you mentioned the marching band, but could you talk about, do children in schools do any projects to be on display at Tulip Time? Or what are the connections? And also, I'm curious, does school full on cancel for Tulip Time in Pella?
Questions. So our local schools are a huge part of making Tulip Time happen as well in several different capacities. So first of all, every school-age child, kindergarten through fifth grade, has opportunity to march in, if not one, multiple parades. Whole city blocks are taken up by school children marching in every parade. And they sing a little song called "We're the Kids from Pella, Iowa," that a former Tulip Queen actually wrote in, I don't know if it was the 60s or the 70s that she wrote this song, and it's still sung by the school children in the parades. I think anyone who spent at least a year in Pella between ages 6 and 11 knows that song. And it's also, I think, more important and key to this is that learning about Pella's culture and Dutch heritage is a huge part of the curriculum at the schools. In their social studies classes or their history classes, they learn about how Pella came to be and the people who lived here then and the people who live here now, how it's grown and changed over the years. And they visit the museums. All the fourth graders visit the Schulte House Museum. I think the second graders visit the Windmill and Historical Village. Another one of our properties is Amsterdam School House, which kids get to go visit and spend a day pretending that they are in or experiencing what school may have been like in the 1850s and 60s. So it's really key to their education as well. But going back to Tulip Time, so that happens in elementary school. In middle school, there's opportunities to march with the marching bands all the way through high school, of course. You might have heard that when I was in middle school, I played the French horn and wore my wooden shoes in marching band as well. So that was quite the experience. And yes, they do get Thursday and Friday afternoons off. So you're still in school in the mornings, but you have your afternoons off. And many of the food booths as well are staffed by young people earning their service hours. Pella Christian High School has a booth as a fundraiser, and various churches have booths as fundraisers for their young people to be able to go on service trips and things like that. So the young people are really key to making this festival happen. Even behind the scenes stuff, I think the Pella High School wrestling team helps put up the grandstands or something like that, and Central College too. Has different food booths up and volunteer in a lot of capacities to be able to pull off the festival.
That's really phenomenal that the festival is a multi-generational event across Pella and certainly speaks to how it has lasted close to 100 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is key is when you get people interested and involved when they are 2, 3, 4, 9, 10, 11, and it becomes a part of their blood and just you can feel it in the air this time of year, and it harkens back for me to when I was young, and it's just a huge part of people here. And we get asked a lot too, well, I'm not Dutch, or I just moved here 2 years ago. Is Tulip Time really for me? Yes, it is. In Pella, it's more than just being Dutch. It's celebrating a Dutch culture and celebrating the beauty of this community and the hard work that goes into it. So whether you moved in and you're just plugging in, or you're visiting, you're not from here but you're visiting, it's really a cultural celebration for everybody. Whether you're Dutch for a day and you wanted to put on the Dutch costume and be a part of it that way, or you just want to enjoy the atmosphere and the food and the celebration. There's really something for everyone, no matter your cultural background.
Well, thank you so much. I will continue to be Dutch for a day every time I cross that Marion County line. We have 2 questions left, Jessi, and they are both about attending Tulip Time. So what would be your advice for anyone attending Tulip Time as a first timer?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's hard for me. I've been here since I was little. So I think first of all, if you can find different influencers or bloggers who talk about their experience here, you might get some insider tips that way. If I were you, I would purchase your tickets ahead of time, just so you don't have to stand in lines to purchase your tickets. You can do that on our website, pellahistorical.com, and follow some different links to get to the ticketing website. If you want to visit one of the bakeries or the meat markets, I would go early in the morning. The earlier you're there, the less of a line you're going to have to stand in. If you're there, mid in between the parades or around lunchtime, you might stand in a line up to an hour. Look at the schedule for different pop-up performances. So even if you don't purchase a ticket to watch the grandstand show, the Duchesses are performing randomly in front of the windmill, or the Dutch Family Singers will be performing at an intersection in the downtown. So do check the schedule, which is on our website as well, to see when and where you might find these delightful pop-up performances. And I would say check out a show at the Opera House. I'm not sure if that always comes to the forefront of people's mind, but you're going to be busy. You're going to be walking a lot. There's going to be a lot of crowds. But if you go see a show in the Opera House, you'll have some quiet respite, a comfy chair to sit in, maybe a drink, and it will be a great place to enjoy a show or maybe learn a little bit more about Pella's history through one of their shows there. So those would maybe be my tips and tricks for a smooth festival. And make sure you try all the foods that have names that you don't know what they mean. I think that would be the best thing. Oliebollen, you got to try oliebollen. Means literally oil balls. I mean, you can't go wrong with that. So try all the foods that you don't know what they're going to be.
That sounds great. And we still have two questions because one more came up about attending as a first timer, which is because this is Pella and not Amsterdam, we're not all riding bicycles. So where do we park when we come to Tulip Time?
Great question. Well, first and foremost, I would say go to our website, pellahistorical.com/getting-around. That will give you the specifics of everything that I'm about to tell you, but there's a couple options. First of all, if you get here somewhat early in the day, you'll probably be able to park on a street that's nearby downtown, and just walk a block or two to get to the downtown area. If you're getting here and things are really filling up in the area, we have parking lots that are off-site. One at Pella Christian High School and one sort of across the street from our Walmart. So no matter which direction you're coming into town, there's a different parking lot. And then you pay to park, and then a shuttle will take you to the downtown. So that's another great option. Do look for those details online though, because some of the parking lots are only Friday and Saturday or only Friday. So make sure that you are keeping an eye on that. And then there's several churches in town too that will open up parking lots and sell spots. I know Calvary Church is actually free. You can park, I think it's probably like 8 or 10 blocks from the downtown, and then their shuttle will take you in for free. So lots of options for parking, and we want to make sure you get up to the downtown area safely.
Excellent. Thank you for that. So really overall, it's check the website and be prepared. Come to Pella armed with knowledge to have the best time at Tulip Time.
And that's true, but if you are just deciding last minute to come to Pella and you park your car and walk on into town, you can plant yourself in the middle of the downtown and you'll still find a delightful time to be had. So whether you're a planner or not, I think Tulip Time's a great spot for you. People ask us, do you have to pay to get into Tulip Time? And you say, unless we charged admission on exit 40 and exit 44, it'd be pretty hard because it really encompasses the entire community. So no, it's no fee to enjoy Tulip Time, and you can just come on down and enjoy what there is to see with or without paying for a ticket.
That would be both incredible and awful if you could set up a toll booth off Highway 163.
Yeah,
Now,
I think so.
our last question is a two-parter, because maybe it's the same answer, maybe not. First part, what do you think is the best kept secret of Tulip Time? And as a Pella local, what is your absolute favorite? Could be the same answer, maybe not. And we'll wrap up with this answer.
Sure, sounds great. I think the best kept secret of Tulip Time is actually one that can be seen year round. That miniature Dutch village that I told you about that started in the 1930s and at first was only on display at Tulip Time and now is display all season long is something that people do not realize that we have. And when they see it, they're just completely enamored and delighted. I should have included a photo of how it looks now, but it has taken up an entire room and just full of Dutch miniatures. Every area of the miniature village represents a different town or province of the Netherlands. So it's so detailed that in one area, all of the little dolls are all wearing the same costume of Walkeren or of Volendam or Hindelopen. It spans all 4 seasons, so you can start in the spring with the tulip fields blooming and you work your way around it, and you end in wintertime with people skating down the canals, and all in teeny tiny miniatures, and also all done by volunteers, spanning its 90-year history. So that is, I think, the best kept secret, but you can come see it March through December, not just at Tulip Time. And I think my favorite part of Tulip Time, that's a good question. It's hard to pick just one thing, because I think that my favorite part is just the feeling in the air, the excitement. I love showing off our community to visitors and answering questions about my costume, getting to show off this hometown that I love so much. But I will say, I think the parade, if I had to pick like one actual event, I think the parade would be my favorite, especially the nighttime lighted parade. To just sit with a cozy blanket with your friends and family, enjoy your plate of puffer cheese or your Oli Bolin, and watch these beautiful floats come by in full lights. That parade starts at 8:30, and you know it's just a great way to end your day in Pella.
That is a really good point, and that lighted parade is something that is still on my list. And with that answer, we will bring this webinar to a close. Thank you to everyone for joining us today, and we hope to see many of you at Tulip Time in just a
Absolutely.
couple weeks. We'd like to extend one last thank you to our presenter, Jessi, and we hope that everyone will sign up for the Iowa History 101 webinars that will continue to take place on the second and fourth Thursdays throughout the year. There are many great stories to tell in the upcoming months. For more information and to register for future webinars in this series or to watch recordings, check out our website at history.iowa.gov. Looking to learn more Iowa history? You can find and watch over 50 recorded webinars of past 101 programs on the Iowa Culture YouTube channel. We look forward to seeing you for the next Iowa History 101 webinar on April 25th. The topic will be truly one almost as close to my heart as the Dutch. The upcoming topic is Bert and Lou, the story of the Herbert Hoover family. Thank you again for joining us today, and have a great afternoon.